everyone. Welcome to ALOUD. It's nice to see you all here. I'm Jessica Strand. I'm the Senior Director of Public Programs and Strategic Engagement for the Library Foundation of Los Angeles. We're quickly moving through the fall, and it's nearly November, and how is that possible? This week, we are lucky to have two programs. The first this evening with the immensely talented patron saint of the Los Angeles Public Library, Susan Orlean, and on Thursday with the novelist, short story writer Gish Jen. This fall, ALOUD has covered a wide range of subjects, always pushing the importance of ideas, thought, and creative freedom. We've hosted a slew of terrific speakers who have discussed authoritarianism, trans rights, friendship, James Baldwin, and there is more to come until we end our season mid-December. For further information, go to lfla.org/ALOUD. Please join us. We'd love to see you there. And at a time when intellectual freedom and democratic values are being stifled, books are being banned, and access to civic and public goods like education, parks, radio, and even health information is shrinking, our libraries stand strong with our doors wide open to everybody. Libraries are essential to the path forward, ensuring equitable access to key resources, advancing literary knowledge, and quickly responding to multiple needs and challenges in our broad and diverse communities. Supporting the Los Angeles Public Library isn't just about believing in this institution, it's about believing in the people who walk through our doors every single day. As tonight's guest writes, quote, "The library is a gathering pool of narratives and of the people who come to find them. It is where we can glimpse immortality. In the library, we can live forever." If you are not yet a member, I hope you will consider joining. Now more than ever, we need your help, and look right there. There, you can put your phone up to it. You can do all the things you need to do if you want to support us. I'd also like to thank our sponsors, Humanities Endowment Fund, the Ralph M. Parsons Foundation, Judith and Steve Krantz Foundation, the Peck Endowment for Cultural Programs, Golden Globe Foundation, Aaron Fox Schiff, the Los Angeles County Board of Supervisors through the Department of Arts and Culture, Deloitte, the Sharon Oxborough Endowed Fund for ALOUD, and a giant thanks to all those members and donors here tonight. And now for tonight's program. Susan Orlean has been producing top-notch narrative nonfiction for years. She became a staff writer at The New Yorker 38 years ago. Her work delves into the eccentric with gusto, researching with an intensity that gives a whole new meaning and insight into the subjects she covers. Her deep curiosity leads to the overlooked and the unexpected, bringing her subjects to life with a unique humor, enthusiasm, introspection, and smarts, which time and again make an indelible impression on her reader. She's written a New York Times bestseller about this very library and the fire that it survived in 1986. Rin Tin Tin, a Florida horticulturist accused of stealing endangered species of orchids. The list goes on. Orlean says of her writing, quote, "Writers fall into two categories. There are those who have something they want to say to the world, and there are those who believe the world has something to tell them. I'm wholly of the second sort." End of quote. This evening, she will discuss her new memoir, Joyride, which explores her writing career from its infancy to her early days working at various newspapers to her position at The New Yorker, all the while sharing fabulous, improbable stories along the way. She will be in conversation with Madeleine Brand, host of the award-winning daily news and culture show Press Play. Please welcome Susan Orlean and Madeleine Brand. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming out.
If you thought this was the Dodger game.
I know, you're going to be here for another 18 hours.
Right.
Okay, before we get into this,
Hit me.
one sentence. Sakai or Issey Miyake?
Oh, that's so unfair. The top is Issey Miyake, the
No.
bottom is Sakai.
Wait, I did not know that.
I know, this is not a setup.
I
So
did not plan this.
I guess the answer is
Both.
both. It has to be both.
If you had to pay $300,000 in tariffs,
Oh my God. Well, having nearly had that experience, I can tell you the answer is send that back.
nothing's worth it.
What Madeleine is referring to is the recent tragic experience I had ordering an outfit for my book party from a Canadian retailer. And I was waiting for it, and then I got a notice in my mailbox saying I had to pick it up at the post office, which surprised me. And I went to the post office, waited in line, got to the clerk, and she looked it up, and then she said to me, "You owe $2,100 customs charge." And I said, very funny, very funny. What do I owe? She said, $2,100. And I stood there. I think the other people in the post office must have been overhearing this conversation. Everybody was like, "You owe what?" And I said, "Oh my God, I didn't even want to touch the box." I said, "Send it back. I have no, get it out of here." And she said to me, "I've been doing a lot of that this week," because it was the first week of the tariffs, and people were getting things from, Canada was a huge tariff.
And now you won't get anything from Canada. Just
No, I'm
forget it.
terrified.
No
In fact,
maple syrup.
I was just in Canada 2 days ago, and I thought, will they have dogs sniffing at the border saying you have goods from Canada in your bag? I was genuinely worried.
They saw that skirt. They're ready to
Right.
go for it.
You owe us $2,100.
So also this plays into just, the general idea of a writer is someone who's not wearing designer clothes, right? And so you write a really funny anecdote in the book about when Meryl Streep, who played Susan in the movie adaptation, had to be outfitted, and they wanted to look in your closet and
This was a sad story, in fact. I was very excited. I welcomed the costume designer for the movie into my home, and I spent several hours parading my favorite outfits, and I tend to like Japanese designers and things that have a little bondagey kind of vibe. And anyway, we had a lot of fun, and at the end, he said to me, "Oh, this was great, and we're not going to use any of these clothes." And I said, "Why?" And he said, "Because we need to make a journalist look like a journalist." And actually what was funny is when a few of my friends saw the film, they said, "You would never wear clothes like that." And I said, "Thank you. I wouldn't." I mean, it's very funny.
Well, you also wouldn't have an affair with your source.
Well, right.
And try to kill the screenwriter.
I would say the majority of what occurred in the film doesn't replicate real life. But, and they did make Meryl Streep look kind of like very plain Jane.
Yeah,
like,
she's a little frowsy.
Yeah, a little Talbot, sort of, no offense. If everybody here is wearing Talbots, I'm sorry. But they just made her look very generic, like she didn't think about her clothes. And
Right.
but that was a very funny, one of the funnier moments in the course of seeing that film develop.
Yeah. Okay, so let's get into some of the bio stuff. And I'm going to skip the early childhood part because fashion's more fun. But I want to get to your sojourn in Oregon. So just to telescope, Susan graduates from college with no marketable skills whatsoever. She loves Faulkner and Joyce, and her father said, yeah, okay, when are you going to law school? So instead of going to law school, you go to Oregon and work for an alt weekly there.
Yes.
And then you do a whole bunch of cocaine.
As one did at that time.
Sounds like a really fun time
Well, I
in your
think
life.
that was I think the majority of the economy in Portland, Oregon at that time was based on cocaine, honestly. I mean, it's true that a lot of restaurants were being funded by drug money. But yes, I did, but I didn't do so much that I wasn't high function. I mean,
You were very functional, I'm sure.
I was highly functional, and even at that pretty early stage, I was 24 or whatever, you know, really a newcomer to the world of writing. I was already thinking beyond Portland. I already felt like I love Portland, I'm having a great time, but there will come a point where this isn't enough, that I'm gonna want to write for bigger publications. So very early on, I started figuring out how can I get assignments from national publications, which is tricky when you're in Portland at that time was really a small, kind of under the radar city. It wasn't as sort of prominent in the national consciousness as it is now, really. It was a very quiet little city. And it was tricky to figure out how I would somehow get an assignment from a national publication when I was in this little city that really wasn't of national interest, particularly. And I fretted about it. I really wasn't sure how I would kind of work around that.
Because your ultimate goal was always to get to the New Yorker.
Yeah, even then, I started subscribing to the New Yorker when I was in college, and it was both the best thing I could have done, but it also made me think, this is the only place I want to work, and how will I make that happen when it seemed so unattainable? Back then, the New Yorker kind of went out of its way to be cryptic, and there were, the bylines ran at the end of stories in tiny type. There was no index. It was deliberately hard to figure out, and there was no masthead. So if you thought, well, I'll just write a letter to the editor, sort of send my clips, well, there was no way to even find out the address of the magazine. I mean, probably was listed in the phone book, but it was very hard to imagine how to break in, and they didn't hire a lot of people from outside their very narrow kind of perspective. So I knew that I would have to build my way there. I knew that I wasn't going to leap fully formed from Portland, Oregon into the New Yorker. Instead, I felt like I need to start writing for these bigger magazines and show that I can carry a story that's going to have a national audience.
So when you're in Oregon, you get this great story, and that is, it's this cult run by the Bhagwan Shree Rajneesh. And I don't know if you've seen that mini-series that came out, but it was
Right,
quite
Wild
explosive.
Country, yeah.
Lots of, murder. And
For instance.
and grand plans to take over the world. And you pitch that story to the Village Voice, and they take it. And you show up and you say to yourself, what do I do now? what is the story?
Right. That is a sensation that I have pretty much 24 hours a day. Literally, I have never done a story where I didn't have this moment of pure horror where I've thought, why am I doing this? And what is this about? And what's the story? And honestly, I can barely think of a story that I've done where I didn't go through that experience of really feeling like, I always think, why couldn't I have just gone about this in an easier way? Like, why couldn't I do 5 new, luggage brands you should keep your eye on? Or, there are ways to be a journalist that are so much easier. And there are even ways to be a narrative journalist that are easier. And instead, I had some impulse to always sort of go at a kind of across the grain against the obvious story. When I went out to Rajneeshpuram, in a way, the story was just, there was a simplicity to it, which was, I'm going to spend a few days here and really make it an observational piece. What is this place like? Who is here? Why are they here? What's it like to be in the presence of Bhagwan? It was fascinating. And so doing, in essence, a documentary capture of this very strange world was story enough. It was because of the very exotic nature of the subject. I would say more than 50% of the time, I'm doing a story where the very ordinariness of it is what's attracted me, and I have this huge kind of lump in my throat thinking, what was I thinking? How can this be a story? There's no story here. What have I done? And, really grappling with that, because on one hand, I really believe in these stories. I believe in the reason for doing them intellectually. But at the moment that you're there thinking, what's the story? Mm-hmm. What is this story? It can be a little terrifying.
What is so fabulous, one of the many fabulous things about your writing is your lead, the leads that you craft. And the lead for that story was, the fact is, if you really love Bhagwan, you don't wear deodorant.
And that was a true fact. That was a true fact. First of all, thank you. Secondly, Bhagwan was highly, highly allergic. So if you got a chance to have an audience with him, you were given scent-free, hypoallergenic soap and shampoo, and you had to wash yourself with these, and then you had to agree to be sniffed by one of his sniffers. Human sniffers. It would have been better if it was a dog, I think. But to get, I have to admit, I feel proud of my leads, and I work really hard on them. I feel like attention is everything with readers. If you don't nail people to the page right off the bat, they're going to abandon the piece, either right away or they won't even begin reading it. And if it's a story that doesn't have drama, that it's not a murder, it's not a celebrity profile, it's not something that people instantly say, oh, I've got to read that. It's even more important to write a lead where they go, well, I don't understand what this is about, but I'm going to keep reading. I like feeling that people might be a little confused initially, that they might think, what are you talking about, deodorant, Bhagwan? Also, it's fun to write the word deodorant. You know that it's going to kind of capture people's attention. And I do feel, I work so hard on my leads that I invest a lot in them because I think they're so important. And never more than the present, where our attention spans are being competed for by a million different kinds of media, and people have been trained to be quite impatient, that if something doesn't instantly interest them, then they're done.
You say you've always had an evangelical zeal about your story ideas. And so how do you know that they're good? Because you just said that many times you show up and you're like, oh, what is this story? This is very ordinary. This obviously was not, as you say, because it was so extraordinary. But most of your stories they start out as ordinary, and then there's the pearl of the extraordinary that you find in them. How do you know it's going to be a good story?
Well, that's a great question. I think the thing that is necessary but not sufficient is that I am genuinely curious, that I want to answer the question of what is this about. And I find a lot of very ordinary things really interesting if I think about them. I'll give you an example, which is, and maybe this is the best example, which is why I wrote about it at length in the book. I had been asked by Esquire magazine to write a profile of Macaulay Culkin, who was 10 years old at the time. And it was a story that was meant to illustrate what adolescence was all about. And I remember I had never written for Esquire, so I was quite excited to get the assignment. Back then, Esquire was an amazing magazine. But I thought, you know, I'm actually not at all interested in Macaulay Culkin. I knew that his life didn't represent anything about adolescence, that it was the strangest, most singular life that maybe another 10-year-old movie star could relate to, and that would be about it. So I said to the editor, just out of the blue, and I sometimes wonder where I got the nerve to do this, but I said, I'm not interested in Macaulay Culkin, but how about if I write a piece about an ordinary 10-year-old boy, just a suburban kid somewhere? This sounds really like, whoa, that is such a non-story. Mm-hmm. And yet, I was a 30-year-old woman. To me, a 10-year-old boy was truly exotic. Like, what do they think about? What do they talk about? What do they do all the time? What is their life like?
And then you ended up having one.
I know, which was very weird. And so now I can answer the question, which is I have no idea what they're about. But at that time, the minute I thought about it, I thought, this is actually really exotic and interesting. And I think people who aren't of my same turn of mind wouldn't say, wow, 10-year-old boy, super exotic and interesting. But I think of it that way. And then I was determined to show people why this truly was a trip into an alternate universe, that it really was extraordinary to learn what the life of a 10-year-old was like. To be honest with you, when I first started work on the library book, my first impulse had been, I was in a library one day, and I suddenly thought, God, I wonder how libraries work. Like, how do they work? How do they just function? And the more I thought about it, the more I thought, I actually have no idea. I don't know how they function. That's the most interesting thing I've ever thought about. And this is the transitional moment where I go from thinking, to thinking, oh my God, this is the single most interesting thing I've ever thought about. And I think then, how do I know it's going to work as a story? If you are genuinely interested in something, you bring the necessary passion and curiosity to it. Certainly, there are subjects that are sexier than others, that are more easily presented to a reader than others. But I think if you're a good storyteller, you can make those things interesting if you're interested in it.
You can make anything interesting?
I think you could, yeah. I mean, don't challenge me. But I think if I were really genuinely curious about something, I could make it interesting to you, because the reason that it strikes me as interesting, like I will give you another example, which was one day I was in a grocery store. This happens to me a lot, where I'm somewhere and I suddenly go, oh my God, this is the most interesting place I've ever been. So I was in a grocery store, and the Pepperidge Farm guy was like putting stuff in the Pepperidge Farm, thing, and I actually know what those are called because of my reporting. It's called an end cap. But I suddenly thought, how do grocery stores work? They're so complicated. How do they possibly work? This is like a whole insane universe. I cannot believe how complex it is, and that nobody has stopped and said, I'm going to understand how these places work. So, of course, I ran into the New Yorker the next day like my hair was on fire. And I said, I've got to write about grocery stores. They're so interesting. And the thing is, it was so incredibly interesting. It turned out to be so much more interesting than I could have even imagined. And, I think the elements were there. I'm really interested in common denominators. A grocery store is a common denominator. Everyone goes to the grocery store. It has to serve a complex universe of people, and the one I was writing about was in the single most culturally diverse neighborhood in the United States. So they were serving this very, very diverse community, and they have simple issues, like they get too much cash. Well, that's probably not true anymore because no one uses cash. But they used to have to deal with massive amounts of cash that would come in the course of the day, and they had a runner who would go like 5 times a day to a bank to get rid of the cash because they didn't want all of the cash in the store. So it was...
How long did you spend reporting that?
Well, this was the old days of the New Yorker.
And how many words did you get for that?
Well, I was at the grocery store for about 4 weeks, just sort of going in every day and hanging out. And, one day I would be in the meat department, one day I would be in the dairy department. And then there was a lot of background research that I was doing because it's a really interesting industry. How many words? I probably wrote, say, 9,000 words. Every one of them was good.
I'm sure. So that's under the Robert Gottlieb editorship, where you could get that. And then Tina Brown takes over, and she comes from Vanity Fair, and she has a meeting, or she's a dictum, where she cites 2 stories that are not the type she wants moving forward. One, a multi-part series on grain, and 2, your story on the supermarket.
Yes, and a very dear friend. By the way, if you ever want to know if someone's really your friend, this is a frenemy kind of move, because a friend said to me, Tina mentioned in the sales meeting that your story is the kind of story that she isn't going to run anymore. At that point, I hadn't met Tina Brown yet. So when she called me in, because I had been promised a contract in an office by Robert Gottlieb, and then he was booted out. And I was really downhearted. I thought, obviously, Tina is not going to keep me. Obviously. I mean, I am the poster child of what she's getting rid of. So my expectations were very low. And I'm still convinced that I came in and she was like, forgot to look up who was meeting with her, that I was just one of the many people she was meeting with. And she was like, okay, fine, you're in the office in the corner and give me a story on Marky Mark by next Wednesday. Listen, and I thought, all right, I got my contract in my office, but I'm still going to have to somehow win her over, when I knew that the kinds of stories that I really wanted to do were things she was really afraid of. She was afraid that readers didn't find them interesting, that they didn't have a fundamental sort of story arc. To her credit, the first piece I did for her was, in fact, about Marky Mark, and the second one was a story of my own idea, and she kind of gave me the leeway to give it a shot. And then we ended up having a really good working relationship where I would say I alternated between a story of my devising and one that was more of her devising. She and I had a lot of conversations about this where she said, you know, your stories are high wire acts because if they're not executed really well, they will completely fall apart. And I don't disagree with her. I think a story that doesn't have an obvious hook has to be twice as good as a story with an obvious hook. So I did not disagree with her on that, but she trusted me. I won her trust. I mean, it wasn't automatic. And then she really was pretty willing to let me, if I came to her and I said, I'm really, really interested in this, I can hardly think of a story that she said no. I really can't remember one that she said, you know, not gonna fly. She's the person who I came to initially with the story that I knew nothing about where it was gonna go, but where I saw that this weird guy had been arrested with orchids in a swamp in Florida, and it's not like a big high value crime. It was a very peculiar story, and I said to her, I don't know what it's about, but it's just something about it is interesting to me.
I love that you found that story in the back of a seat back pocket on an airplane.
I know.
Because you had run out of your reading material and you just picked up this old piece of newspaper that someone had stuck in there in the last flight.
Yeah, someone had left a Miami Herald.
Amazing. And there in the back pages was this little item about this guy.
It was, you know, I was flipping through the Miami Herald really sort of in despair because I thought, well, I'm going to find nothing interesting to read in here. But I do love local news. I really do. So I saw this headline, local nurseryman, Seminole crew arrested in swamp with rare orchids. And I thought, not a single one of those words belongs in the same sentence. I mean, and I just thought it was the weirdest headline I'd ever seen. So I tore the story out, and the story was short. It had very little beyond, this guy was arrested, he had 4 pillowcases full of flowers. And I just thought, this is beyond weird. I didn't know orchids grew wild in Florida. I didn't like orchids. I mean, there was nothing. I hate Florida. I mean, everything everything about it was not for me, except that it was so weird that I thought, I don't know what this is, but I've got to pursue it. I came in literally the next day to Tina and I said, I don't know what this is about, but I'd love to look into it. And she said, well, go to the hearing and see what you find out.
And here's the lead. John LaRoche is a tall guy, skinny as a stick, pale-eyed, slouch-shouldered, and sharply handsome, in spite of the fact that he is missing all his front teeth. It's just fantastic.
Just the facts. Just the facts.
It's just such a great lead. And so when you write the story, you come up with the lead, you work really hard on it, and then is it like a coat hanger and everything kind of falls from there?
Yeah, I have trouble writing things out of order. I feel like just the way you wouldn't tell a story out loud out of order, it feels very unnatural to me. I may know sections that I will write, but I feel like I need to start in the beginning and tell you the story the way I would tell you out loud. So I spent a lot of time just working on that lead, working on the first paragraph, and then I really write essentially from there through to the end. I move things around, of course.
And you have your index card method.
My trusty index card. I'm going to actually have to end my career as a writer if they ever stop making index cards. I don't know what I would do because I use these 5x8 index cards. And the other day, I was having this sort of apocalyptic mindset, and I thought I should just order like hundreds and have them on hand.
You don't know if they're going to be tariffed out of existence.
I know, though they're probably from Canadian
Yeah.
forests, so
Forget
I'm in
it.
trouble. They're $2,000 for 20 index cards. But when I'm working on a book, to some degree on a story, but especially with a book, I break each kind of sort of chunk of thought or information or quote or description onto one of these index cards, and I use those to build the structure of the book, because I'm able to literally move them around and put them in an order and move that order around, which is, you know, on a computer, you see a very limited amount of landscape. You see so little. And when you're writing a book, you're structuring 100,000 words. I mean, you need to be able to see more than what's on your computer screen. I don't see how you could build a structure without seeing everything. It's like when you're putting together an IKEA furniture piece, I mean, I'm sure many of you take one piece out of the box and then take another piece out of the box, but what they tell you to do is take all the pieces out of the box, spread them out, figure out how they fit together, and it really,
And
I've
then
never
walk
thought
away
of that
and have someone
analogy
else do
before,
it.
by the way. And it's so good, because you do need to see how they all are going to eventually fit together. So to me, structuring a book, I just have to do that. I had around 700 index cards for all of these books. So it really is kind of granular. And from there, I can begin really seeing the shape that I want to write in the book.
So you've really transitioned into a successful book writer from being a New Yorker magazine writer. You're obviously still on staff at the New Yorker, but it seems like your focus is now more on books. And I guess I'm wondering how you feel about the state of magazine journalism now, because it is so different than when you came up and you were making your name in the New Yorker, when there were huge expense accounts and 10,000 word articles on supermarkets, and you could pretty much follow your muse, follow your interest. Now, even the New Yorker is very much more focused on the news and not the weird, quirky story. Do you think that you would have been able to do the things that you did now?
That's hard to say. And there's no question that in many ways the timing of my professional passage was really fortunate. When I got started, there were alternative news weeklies all over the place.
Yeah.
There were Sunday magazines in every city. There were so many more magazines. For instance, there were a lot of women's magazines which ran a lot of good journalism, and they were a great place to begin.
Cosmo.
Yeah, I mean, they ran a lot of good stories. I wrote a lot for them. Many of those are gone. So, and you're right, the New Yorker has shifted. I mean, it may be in part that the news of the world is so constantly pressing, but I think it's also a little bit of a circular thing where fewer people are proposing the kinds of stories that I like to do, so they're not being run as much. And is that because they assume there isn't room for them, or they don't have the confidence to say, I want to do a story about a woman with 27 pet tigers, you know, although why wouldn't you, really?
Yeah.
But it's sort of hard to know. I think the book accidentally became, I mean, Joyride in certain ways is very nostalgic about that period of journalism that, you know, when I started at The New Yorker, I was off to do my first piece. I said to my editor, what's my deadline? And he said, I don't know, what's your deadline? And I said, what do you mean? And he said, well, we don't do deadlines. And I said, give me a deadline. I don't want not to have a deadline. And then I said to him, you know, if I need, I was writing a profile of a man who was an African man who was the king of his tribe in the United States, and he was a cab driver. And I said, well, if he wants to go to Ghana, you know, can I go with him? And he said, if you feel you should, then you should. And then at the end, I said, I sort of took a deep breath, because this was my first feature. And I said, how much will I be paid? And my editor said, it will be sufficient.
Was it?
It was, but like, what an insane thing. And, you know, that is the way they did business.
Yeah.
And I promise you that is not the way business is done anymore. First of all, it's not sufficient, just as a starter.
Yeah.
But no, I mean, it was literally, I think he was shocked that I was saying, like, what's my deadline? Nobody had a deadline. I discuss in the book the fact that that wasn't necessarily the best thing for all of the writers at The New Yorker, citing the case of Joseph Mitchell, who hadn't written since 1960, and he still came into the office every day. And he was, you know, the most amazing writer, and his last work was a book about a man who had a horrible case of writer's block. And it's an amazing book called Joe Gould's Secret, if you've never read it. And then he literally never published another word. And, you know, it was a tragedy. Not having a deadline can be a pretty scary thing. And it can be really, because in fact, no story is ever done. No story is ever good enough. No story is perfect. It can't be perfect. So if you get in this hamster wheel of, I'm going to make it better, I'm going to edit it again, I'm going to keep going back and doing more reporting, you literally will never publish. And it's not to say that having a deadline makes you do inferior work, but there's a sort of pragmatic value to say, we're going to give you enough time, but we're going to give you a deadline, and it'll help you get, move with sort of deliberateness to getting the piece done. So I like deadlines. I don't always make every deadline, but I can't imagine working without one, and how scary that could feel.
Yeah. We're going to get to audience questions in 1 second, but I wanted to get to the library, since here we are. And it's really a beautiful, and beautiful in a larger sense, a tragic sense, a life sense, situation that you have. As you're writing about the library, your mother's memory is going. Your mother has dementia. And you are writing about the repository of all of our memories here while you're watching your mother lose hers. So I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about that, about how you used that very personal experience to report on the LA Public Library.
When I was first inspired to do the book, one of my initial touch points was remembering and being overwhelmed by the memory of going to the library with my mom. And I hadn't thought about it in years. And suddenly I was remembering how often we would go to the library, how magical those trips were. And it was really like this wonderful, nostalgic, poignant recollection. And also there was this little sort of additional part of it, which was, my mother just thought the library was heaven on earth. And she would always confide to me that if she could do it all over again, she would have been a librarian. And even when I was little, I used to always say, Mom, you can still go and be a librarian. But it was like this sort of sacred notion that you could be in this amazing place and help people find books. And she had a real awe that was carried over, I think, to me. When I first got the book contract and I told her, I said, I'm writing a book about the library, and she said, well, I'm the one, very motherly, I'm the one who got you interested in libraries. And I said, you're right, it was you. So it was very much on my mind, and remembering how those early memories were so formative. While I was working on the book, I came across this I saw it online or something, a Senegalese expression that instead of saying someone has died, you say their library has burned. And I didn't really understand what it meant, but I wrote it on an index card and I hung it over my desk, and I would look at it all the time, trying to puzzle through it. As I'm working on the book and writing a lot about the meaning of burning libraries and how this has been a early gesture in authoritarian regimes, is to burn a library, and it's a way of erasing the memory of a community, of a people, and that it's an absolutely classic move when you want to exert control over a culture. In the meantime, so I began thinking, well, libraries are like our communal memory. We all, everyone in a community, in a culture, is looking to the library as containing all of the memories and information that we can share and access. At the same time as my mother's dementia was beginning to advance, and I would talk to her, and I suddenly had this very visual thought of, I would ask her to remember something, and she was searching the way you search in the library on a bookshelf. And in the beginning, she would search a little and find the memory or the thought or the name. And then as her dementia increased, she'd search and search and search and not find it. And the vision of each of us having an internal library became really vivid to me, that our thoughts are contained in a way very much like a library. And even now I find myself literally searching in my, my card catalog for a particular memory or name of someone. And so those two things became so intertwined that we hold all of our thoughts and memories like a personal library, and the library holds those same thoughts and information and memories for the community at whole. And eventually my mom's dementia was pretty complete, and when she died, I felt like now I understand that her whole internal library has vanished with her. It kind of brought the meaning of that expression and the meaning of the book together, obviously in a way that was very sad, but very clear, like the clarity of that, and why, to some degree, we have such emotional connection with our libraries. They're not just places with lots of books, that people feel something beyond that. Even people who don't regularly use the library still have an emotion about it that can't be explained merely because, oh, they won't be able to get their books anymore. It's something more than that. It's something we share in a communal way that is unique in culture.
Yeah. Well, speaking of communal, let's get a few questions from the audience, if there are any questions. We have time for one or two, I think. Yes.
Oh, okay.
I have a question about adaptation, just because that was such a peculiar portrayal of you in the film. How did you work with the filmmakers, the screenwriter, because it was your name and your likeness, but doing things that were totally unlike you must have been surreal?
It was definitely surreal. The thing about selling an option on a book is that you've signed away your legal right to object. I did sign additional amendments to the option that were super weird, saying things like, I understand I'm going to be portrayed as being a drug user and killing a federal officer, and and I'm signing like, yes, I will not prosecute, or bring charges for this portrayal. It was pretty weird. I didn't work with this screenwriter at all. I met multiple times with Spike Jonze, the director, and as I said, with the costume designer, but I didn't work. The script is entirely Charlie Kaufman's, and all the credit goes to him for the film. I think there's someone right there. Okay.
Hi, Susan. Thanks so much for being here tonight. It's been great to hear you talk. I wanted to ask about your work on How To with John Wilson, which I think was a perfect example of taking the ordinary and making it extraordinary. Just curious how that writing experience was maybe different from the book, or if it informed your writing post.
Well, for anybody who doesn't know, I wrote for a season on an HBO show called How To with John Wilson. That's a documentary series that can't be described in many ways. And I don't think it had any particular impact on the writing of this book. I was sort of doing them simultaneously. It came about because John Wilson, unbeknownst to me, had been using my first book, Saturday Night, as a sort of Bible on the first season of the show, and then he asked his agent if I would be willing to have a phone call with them. And I said, sure, why not? And I did, and then they said, would you consider being in the writer's room? It's a very tricky show to write for because it is, it's documentary, but it's structured. So it's not like writing for a fiction show. But it was really interesting, and one of the things is John has this massive library of, he's just constantly filming. And so he has a huge library of things he's filmed, weird things he's seen on the street, weird conversations he's had with people. So the writing of the show was drawing both on that huge library of existing material plus ideas of what he could go and pursue. And I had a great time. It was difficult. It's not easy to write on a show like that, but I love the people, and they were really, and I love the show. The show is amazing, so I was thrilled to be part of it. Is one there?
Thank you. You wrote an article, I think in 2000, about Khao San Road in Bangkok, called, I think, A Place to Disappear. And I'm just wondering, I was living there at the time, and all the expats read it. And I was curious where the idea came from.
Oh, that's so funny. This was a completely accidental story. I had been in Bhutan, and I was flying home, changing planes in Bangkok, and I was sitting next to this young guy on the flight, and he was just a hippie backpacker, and I said, where are you going, and what are you doing? And he said, oh, I'm going to spend a couple nights in Bangkok. And my experience of Bangkok was, well, it's like really nice hotels. And he said, oh, no. Like all of us backpackers stay in these hostels on Khao San Road, and they cost like $1 a night, and everybody's there from all over the world. And I thought, oh my God, I've got to write about this. And it was really one of these things where I landed back in New York and sort of turned around and flew back to Bangkok. I have to make one confession, though. I thought, I'm going to stay in these hostels and hang out with these kids. And I got there, and I thought, on second thought, I'm not staying in the hostels. I hung out with the kids day and night, and then I went to a very nice hotel. I mean, they were but it was so fascinating. It was unbelievable. It was the crossroad of the world, and kids from all over were there, and this was before people had easy internet access, so there were internet cafes all over, and food for like $1, and it was extraordinary. I had so much fun doing the story. And the thing that I love the most is if you went into a used bookstore, kids would read these books, and they didn't want to carry them because they were backpacking. And so there were books in literally every language that all of these different backpackers had left there. And it was really, really fun. My guess is it's still very much like that because it was super cheap. And that was where you could book a flight on some weird decommissioned military plane going to Laos or, for $22. But it was also a little weird. I mean, there were a lot of kids who went there and then vanished. So that was one spooky thing, or all those missing posters, which I'm sure you saw. But it was really a fun story. But totally, I believe in talking to your seatmate on planes because you never know. And that was an instance where I got a story out of him.
So many plane ideas.
I know, planes, I basically just fly around all the time looking for story ideas.
Okay, we have time for one more question. Yeah.
You talked a little bit about how local news kind of inspired you a little bit. I'm curious what you think about local news today and what you read.
You mean the state of local news, or?
I do, but also just what you engage with, and do you get story ideas from local news still?
Yeah, well, I read the LA Times pretty faithfully, and I think there's a lot of good local reporting. And I don't read it for the national reporting, honestly, because I read the New York Times for that, and it just is the same, essentially. But I really do read the local news there, and I feel like there are often really interesting stories that engage me. I've never used one as the basis of a story idea. No, that's not true. I have one that I haven't done the story yet, but it was a story that I read in the LA Times, and it was a fabulous story idea. And I was about to do it right when COVID occurred, and so I've shelved it, but I still plan on going back for it. But you know, sadly, we're just in a tough place with local news, and I think we've lost a sense of really wanting to know about the communities we're in, and we're getting, you know, whatever Apple News feeds or Google News, which is, sometimes they do have local stories, but I'm not sure where this will all end. I really don't know, and I'd like to believe that we're going to reboot somehow, and whether it's that these are all going to go online and, you know, be more economically produced, or I'm not sure. But it's certainly, we lose a huge amount by, I mean, for me, think of all the murder stories you wouldn't get.
Exactly.
I'm serious.
And the
I
car
mean,
chases on TV.
But I mean, I really look forward to reading the LA Times, and I do it, you know, every day pretty faithfully, and it doesn't disappoint.
Okay, you write that you don't know how to end things, that it's hard for you. So we're not going to end. We're just going to be here like a Dodger game forever. But I do want to know what's next for you.
Well, a couple of things. First of all, we are in the middle of pitching the television adaptation of the library book. So fingers crossed on that. I mean, really would be exciting. And then for reasons that I cannot understand, I actually have just signed a new book contract. You know, every time I finish a book, I think, that's it. I'm so done. I'm never writing another book. And I had this thing that happened, which was my husband and I were on a trip. We happened upon a building that I became very interested in, and I kept thinking, damn, that's like a really cool idea for a book. And then I thought, no. But it kept coming back and bothering me until I finally had to surrender. So I don't want to say too much about it because it'll be a few years till I'm done with it, but I just couldn't shake it off. And that's usually the feeling that I get, where I just keep thinking, God, that's interesting. God, that's interesting. So that's what I'm up to.
Fabulous. Well, this has been a joy to read, and you'll be signing. Thank you for
Thank
being here
you.
tonight.
Thank you both. Susan will be signing in the lobby, so please get your book and get her to sign it for you. Thank you all for being here. Bye.